We gave an overview last week of Daniel, of the way the book was constructed, of the ways in which it is kind of laid out, and an overall perception of the point, right? The audience, but also some of the stories. And you'll remember that our plan, since we've done the overview, is we're going to break the book down, skipping chapter 1, but we're going to look at this middle section, the Aramaic section, that have parallel chapters, and we're looking at 2 and 7 tonight. Next week we'll look at 3 and 6, and then on the 23rd, 4 and 5 pair well together, and then the last night we'll look at that the last 5 chapters together. And so I hope many of you have already reported that you did your homework and read chapters 2 and 7, and so we're going to dive in a little bit. But remember that this book is a whole, and these parts do work together to tell a larger story. What questions do you have that do you come with already? Is there anything? Howell, what did you learn? I would love for you to tell the story that you, yes, great. That was great information.
There is a town in Georgia that we're all familiar with called Plains. Did you know that the original name of that town was Plains of Dura?
So Howell's reporting to the group that Plains, Georgia's original name was Plains of Dura. And so we're in a state that has at least a town where that good president was from, that's got a good biblical name, right? Do you remember when it dropped the moniker?
I think the early 1900s.
Early 1900s. That's pretty cool. We got a Bethlehem, Georgia. Yeah, there's a lot of spots in Georgia that claim to be God's country. Absolutely. All right. Any other questions about chapter 2 or chapter 7 before we get started? All right. I gave you a chance. This is the big picture. I like to always start with the big picture. So you'll remember that the importance of Daniel is related to this idea that we've got this center section, written all in Aramaic, that ties these stories together. They mirror one another in some ways. And so we're looking this week at both chapters 2 and 7. So the importance of divine aid is central to Daniel 2. We've got this king who has a troubling dream, right? In chapter 2. And who does the king summon? Magicians, soothsayers, diviners, diviners. I don't know how you say that, but these magicians, these dream readers, and that was right. They were mediums, and that was a pretty important job back then, right? It was something people did all the time, and the Babylonians developed divination into a science, and it was widely respected in the ancient world. It was something that people did not scoff at, right? So Daniel is not the only biblical book that takes issue with these Babylonian readers, right? Second Isaiah mocks them, but in this case, these diviners, these soothsayers, are presented with a pretty impossible task. What is it? Not only that, not only interpreting the dream, but what do they also have to tell the king? What was the dream? Like, at least give us something to work with, right? But he says, tell me what the dream was. Not only that, but interpret it. And if you don't, there's going to be trouble, right? So do they have success? They do not, right? He becomes furious. He did. He ordered their execution. Absolutely. And so this kind of irrational behavior is not typically attributed to rational people, right? I mean, usually someone who acts like this, we might say, has an anger problem or a power problem. This king is a tyrant, right? And the book is building a caricature of this king, right? This guy, he's a piece of work, okay? Daniel pleads with the king after Daniel is given the chance to divine or to give an interpretation of the dream as well. Daniel pleads with the king. The king gives him a little more time. And who does Daniel turn to? Praise to God. Show me reveal the dream to me, right? So the big difference here is the power of the God Daniel serves, right? Because these Babylonian folks do not know the God of Daniel. And Daniel makes this point clear. No wise men, enchanters, magicians, or diviners can show to the king the mystery that the king is asking, but there is a God, in heaven who reveals mysteries. So Daniel not only interprets it, but first narrates the dream. And the dream is a statue with various metals. And Daniel kind of begins to interpret it in terms of a sequence of kingdoms. He tells the king, you are the head of gold, right? God has given him power over the whole earth. He'll be followed, however, by an inferior kingdom represented by the statue of silver. And then there'll be a third bronze kingdom, and finally a fourth kingdom mixed with what? Clay and iron. Right, iron and clay. And so this kingdom, that fourth kingdom, because it's made up of two things, it's not going to be united, right? It is going to not remain united. And then the God of heaven is going to come in and set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed and pass on to other people. So this idea of four kingdoms is important because Daniel is less explicit in this chapter about these four kingdoms, okay, as an interpretation of the dream. But it's really, it's more famous in chapter 7, which is why they pair so well together, okay? And the implications of those four kingdoms become apparent in light of these other texts. So if 7 is never written, we lose a lot of information, right? But because 7 is available, we've got better background, okay? And it also points to this sequence. The kingdoms are usually identified as Assyria, Media, Persia, and Greece. Folks argue Rome, but these are the kingdoms that usually are identified here. The first three are already found in kind of a lot of history, and the fourth gets added a little later. So Daniel ends up substituting Babylon for Assyria. So it's one of these things that Daniel does in the text, and it's clear from the fact that Nebuchadnezzar is identified as the head of gold that, that this connection's made, right? Because Nebuchadnezzar is the Babylonian leader. Daniel does not identify the other kingdoms in chapter 2, though. It's apparent that for Daniel, the four kingdoms are Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. And this Greek kingdom of Alexander was divided up. And the Jews really were in the middle of all of this strife and struggle in that part of the world. They were getting caught up in it, right? And so they knew exactly where the power shifts were happening, and this image of these different kingdoms would have made a ton of sense, okay? After the rise of Rome, it was incorporated kind of into the sequence as the fourth kingdom. Took Greece's place. And this, by New Testament times, Rome was well established by authors and by theologians, and this interpretation survived until modern critical hermeneutic or scholarship, right? So you've got an apparent connection with four places and movements. You also have the image of, you've got four kingdoms, but where does it start? For what? Metals, right? Starting with gold, going to silver, going to bronze, and then you've got this mixture, okay? Nebuchadnezzar's dream and its interpretation is informed by another idea that was alive and well in the ancient world, and that is that the four ages of human history were symbolized by the metals in declining value, right? We've heard of the Golden Age, right, and the Bronze Age. You've heard of those monikers as we describe parts of history, right? Beginning with gold and ending with the Iron Age. And the Iron Age was a terrible time in the history of the world, right? The Iron Age was this black spot of history, right? Applied to the four kingdoms, it implies a very negative judgment on this Greek or Roman time period. And nonetheless, either way, judgment in Daniel 2 is not nearly as negative as what we find later in Daniel 7, and we're going to look at that in a minute. So you've got four kingdoms, four metals, and then also this idea of the king's reaction, right? When Daniel tells him his interpretation, how does he react? I mean, Daniel's still alive, so at least he didn't chop him up. He's pretty chill about it, isn't he? I mean, it's kind of remarkable that he doesn't flip out. I mean, Daniel's interpreting the demise of the Babylonian kingdom, but he doesn't call for his head, which I think is interesting. But it's also, in chapter 2, it's not quite clear to the king either. He doesn't necessarily identify the later kingdoms, and I think part of it is, how is Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom described? I'm sorry?
It's the
gold, right? He's the top of the heap, right? I mean, if everybody else is going to perish and he's going to perish too, at least he was number one. At least he was no future kingdom's going to measure up to his, right? So maybe that's the driving force here. The king, in any case, is impressed not so much by the content of the dream as by the fact that Daniel is pretty good at figuring out, one, what the dream was, but also this interpretation. What does Nebuchadnezzar do? He rewards Daniel, but what's it say he did? I mean, well, he goes mad, but he prostrates himself in front of Daniel, right? I mean, that's just getting down in your face. That's not an image of a king, is it? But it says, not only did he prostrate himself before Daniel, so to lie flat, right? He lies flat. But he also orders Daniel offerings made to Daniel. He acknowledges not only in offering that Daniel's a pretty cool cat, but he also declares the supremacy of Daniel's God, which is important. He promotes Daniel and his friends to a high office. They get a promotion, right? What's Daniel's new gig? Yeah, he's in charge of all those guys that some of them got slaughtered. He's in charge of all the wise men, right? He's in charge of all these diviners, these folks who might read dreams. He's kind of the head of the intellectual arm of the kingdom going forward. And some folks say that this reaction here is hyperbole, that Nebuchadnezzar getting down on his face and worshiping Daniel is probably not happening. And that maybe the idea that he would do that is wishful thinking. But the fact that the king of this Babylonian empire would acknowledge the God of his people is significant here. Okay? So as Daniel 2 is put together, the main point is Daniel is much better at this dream telling than these folks that didn't even make it out of the first act. And the power of Daniel's ability is not his own, right? It comes from his God. The dream is important for the book of Daniel because it shows kind of the structure of the history of the book, but also it anticipates this same kind of great vision that we're going to talk about in chapter 7, okay? And the motifs of these four kingdoms kind of pull the book together. Now, this dream has fascinated people for a long time, and we've got large charts with these dreams and these images that you can find. I forget, somebody was telling me, it might have been Reed, saying he had a chart. No, somebody told me at some point they had a huge chart of the entire book of Daniel, and some of these, maybe not. So the dream and its interpretation capture the important aspect of apocalyptic theology in Daniel. Now we remember, apocalyptic is that idea of what? The end of Christ coming again, right? The end of the world. And the theology behind it is what Daniel, most folks that study Daniel look toward. And it affirms that all human kingdoms eventually will what? Crumble. Right? There's no hope for them. Doesn't matter if they're made of gold. It's going to end. Right? This knowledge has often given hope to the oppressed and to those who struggle. The final kingdom of God, though, will never pass to another people. And it has yet to reappear. right? And so that's where we find ourselves at the end of chapter 2. So, what I want you to do is use your questions around the table and discuss. We don't have very long. I want to give you maybe 5 minutes around the table. Ron is going to, I guess I will click. You've got table questions. Just answer as many as possible. I'll give you all about 5 or 6 minutes. And we can talk through chapter 2, and then we'll move on to chapter 7. All right. While I'm interested in all 4 of the questions and the answers that you all may have talked about, the only one we'll have time to possibly share about is the last. You may not have even gotten there, depending on how much y'all talked about it. This vision of history is a succession of kingdoms doomed to fail. What kind of lasting value does that have for us? Did y'all get there? Anybody? All earthly kingdoms fail, right? And no matter whether it's built on a new idea or a fresh face or a new pot of gold, it has a time bomb strapped to it. And that day will come when it will fall as well. And so that's why, as Christ followers, as we live into this kingdom idea, this kingdom of God idea, this big idea that Daniel 2 alludes to, this idea that there is a day when a kingdom will be established that will never disappear, right? And we are waiting. We are serving as we do, but we are waiting. I don't want to miss out on Daniel 7, so we're gonna turn the page, okay? So we've got Daniel 7. I thank Ron for giving us a zoom in here. This is a pivotal chapter in the book, and is the end of this Aramaic section, right? It's presented as a dream, but who's the dreamer this time? Daniel, right? He's not the interpreter of necessarily, but he's the dreamer himself. So we're going to look at some of these images, these mythic images that it starts with, that blows our mind. The 4 winds of heaven are whipping up the great sea. The sea here is not just the Mediterranean, but it's this idea of a primeval organism. It's this big ocean, right? It is cosmic, and 4 great beasts come out of it. Sometimes the Bible looks back at the role of the sea in the drama of creation. Yahweh is said to have cut Rahab in pieces, pierced the dragon, and dried up the sea. That's from Isaiah 51. And drying up the sea is this image of the Exodus, right? Water is what? Life, right? Water is life in every civilization. And a dry seabed, much like Ezekiel, speaks to death. Dryness speaks to death. And so, in other passages, the victory over the sea and its monsters is still expected, right, in the future. And this vision of beasts rising from the sea suggests that creation is coming undone and that anarchy is being loosed upon the world. Daniel 7, these 4 beasts rise from the sea. Now, what might they symbolize? The 4 kingdoms, right? This is why these chapters parallel one another, right? And so they've got this parallel. We've already met these 4 kingdoms in Daniel 2, right? These are hybrid creatures. The first is like what? A lion with eagle's wings. The second, a bear, excuse me, not burr. The third, a leopard. And the choice of these particular beasts in Daniel 7 probably were influenced by an earlier writer, Hosea, and Hosea 13, 7 and 8 says, "So I will become a lion to them. Like a leopard, I will lurk beside the way. I will fall upon them like a bear robbed of her cubs." What's the fourth beast? It's harder to describe, isn't it? It has iron teeth, right? What's it doing? Devouring, chomping up, breaking things, right? It is a chaos agent. The stamping suggests potentially that the animal could be elephant-like. In the Hellenistic age, elephants were used in warfare. As someone who has had an opportunity to ride an elephant, that they're not. It's not like they're creatures that are easily maneuverable. I've been on a horse as well. I had trouble maneuvering a horse. I did not grow up on a farm, Abe, but these huge animals just inspired terror, right? I mean, you see an elephant coming at you with a big guy with metal on. I'm probably going the other way if all I'm doing is standing on the ground. But anyway, this beast had 10 horns, and then what sprouts up? Another little horn, right? This horn is the focus of attention of the interpretation that we're going to talk a little bit about. The scene shifts to heaven, thrones are set, and who appears first with hair white as wool? God. It says the Ancient of Days, right? The Ancient of Days appears with hair as white as wool. A stream of fire flows out before him, and he has the entourage of tens of thousands. And the beasts are subjected to judgment by the Ancient of Days. The fourth beast is condemned to death by fire, while the others are deprived or separated or deprived of their kingdoms. And then another heavenly figure appears. How are they described? Like a son of man, which is like saying a human being, right? I mean, it's this idea that this person has human qualities, but they appear with the clouds of heaven, right? So presented before the Ancient One, and he's given dominion, glory, and kingship that will last forever. So this imagery is helpful for us, and as we parse through it, Glenn has already pointed out that the Ancient of Days is obviously the image of God, this white-headed figure. Riding on the clouds is an attribute of a divine figure, and so this Son of Man riding on the clouds also has divine features. And in the Hebrew Bible, apart from chapter 7 that we're studying, the figure riding on the clouds is always God, right? There is no description of someone in the clouds other than Yahweh. Yet in Daniel 7, this figure is different, right? Clearly, two different beings here, right? This
sounds like the book of Revelation. These characters do sound like the book of
absolutely.
the book of Revelation.
Absolutely. They've got a lot of apocalyptic images, Jeremy. Yep. And so as we kind of dive into some ideas of interpretation, Daniel is perplexed by this vision, right? He approaches an angel and asks for help. And I'm not sure the answer was any more clarifying. As for these four beasts, four kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. So Daniel asks again for help, right? More clarification, especially about this fourth beast with this little upstart horn. And this horn, we're told, made war on the holy ones and was prevailing against them until the Ancient One came and gave the kingdom to the Holy One. So this fourth beast represents the fourth kingdom, which is different from all the others, and it's clear that they're the most troubling, right? This fourth beast is certainly keeping the hands of those who are dealing with it more full than the other. And some of the writers talk about this analogy with chapter 2, but also from the succession of kings throughout the book, that this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. He's not one of the oldest sons of Antiochus III, but Epiphanes suspended the right of the people of Judea to live in accordance with their ancestral law and barred them from celebrating festival. Now you know that the history of the Jewish people, the way they told story was through festival. It's the way they lived life, right? And so to cut them off from being able to do that was detrimental. People were forbidden to circumcise their children, and they were forced to participate in pagan festivals. And so this was life-altering for these folks. For a long time, interpreters assumed that holy ones or saints of the Most High were the Jewish people, but it's been clear since Dead Sea Scroll scholarship that heavenly hosts or angels are the Holy One descriptor. This heavenly host or an angel. And usually when human beings are called holy ones or saints, even in the New Testament, it's because they've gone on, right, and assimilated. They're in heaven, and now they are with all of the other. Other spots in Daniel, holy ones are clearly angelic. There's an angel who pronounces judgment on Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4, and there are other examples. But the point of Daniel 7 is that his actions, Epiphanes' actions, transcended ordinary human affairs. This is not just Epiphanes angering earthly people. This has eternal consequence, right? He's messing with the wrong crowd because of who backs them, right? And so in suppressing the cult or the group that we know, he's making an assault on heaven itself. We've got this idea that the kingdom that the Jews are reaching for at all times is realized on three levels, okay? First, the heavenly enthronement of the one like a Son of Man, in the rule of the angelic holy ones, and in the rule of the Jewish people on earth. And Daniel 7, scholars think that it was written to assure the Jews who were being persecuted that they were not alone. Again, we've heard this story over and over again. They're not alone in their struggle. They have powerful allies in heaven. And eventually, God is going to judge their enemies on their behalf. Okay? So when the chapter is interpreted as speaking only of Jewish people, this message is missed, because this is about all of humanity, right? So, and equally, if the beasts of the sea are only interpreted as being merely earthly kingdoms, there's significance missed there, right? For Daniel, creation was coming undone in a large sense and could only be set right by divine intervention. And so this isn't just about powerful people on earth. This crosses over, and is why it's such powerful apocalyptic literature. So the lasting significance of this chapter lies in the image of the one like the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And it's affirmed by the possibility that heaven will deliver. It's going to happen, right? In time, it's going to be taken to imply a new kind of Messiah or Savior figure, one who was not of human origin. And for the followers of Jesus, this text mirrors his place on earth, right? Makes it possible to affirm that Jesus was this image, right? This Messiah. Even though he didn't drive the Romans from Jerusalem and he died a death, his resurrection story points to this future and this affirmation that he is the fulfillment of this. You know, he could stand in as the fulfillment of this vision by Daniel. Okay? Any questions before I send you to the questions on the tables and we finish up in 4 minutes? All right. Then talk amongst yourselves around these last questions. All right, I'm sure all of you would be eager to stay till 7:30 to run through all of these questions, but because it's 7 o'clock and I want to honor your time, I'd like to bring our conversation to a close. Again, this lasting significance of this chapter, it's a reminder of always of the need for hope in the lives of people who struggle. Andy?
Well, it's going to have anything to do with Daniel.
Yeah.
I want to say happy anniversary to you and Connie. I know you've
Oh,
been many years.
thank you. Yes. Jennifer, yes. Connie's my mom. Yeah, Connie's my mother. Yeah. I've lived 48 happy years as the son of Connie and 26 as the husband of Jennifer. But no, you're kind to say that. I appreciate it. But this hope is something that we hold on to, but we also carry out that door, right? And hope's not something you hold on to, is it? It's something you share. And I think Daniel was called by God to interpret dreams and to share the love of God and the promise of a powerful God who saves to all who would listen. And so let's remember that as we leave this place tonight, and share that love and hope with those we meet.